Hello everyone, welcome to ToolTech MD. In today's video, I'm going to be upgrading the transmission on the axial SMT10 Maximum Destruction. We will be upgrading from the stock plastic gears to all new metal gears. In addition to this, I will also be upgrading the spur gear from the stock plastic spur gear to a 55 tooth hardened steel spur gear. I am looking forward to completing these upgrades. Let's get started. First thing I'll do is go ahead and get the body removed. Okay, so the gears I'll be upgrading to are the axial AX31585 metal gears. These can be found in the newer model SMT10s. Along with that, I'm going to be upgrading the spur gear from the stock plastic spur gear to a steel spur gear from GPM Racing. This is a 55 tooth spur gear. It'll give us some additional speed. Lastly, I'm going to be replacing the transmission housing with a new plastic housing because from the factory, the three screws that hold the output shafts to the output gear came loose inside the case and chewed it up, so we will be replacing that as well. I'm going to go ahead and flip the truck on its side now. Okay, so using the 2mm hex driver, I'm going to go ahead and remove these four screws to hold the transmission and motor assembly into the truck. And as I take these out, I will lay them out exactly how I remove them so I know what goes where. And our fourth and final screw, I'll support the assembly as I remove this one. And that can drop down. Okay, next we'll just remove our driveshaft coupler, our rear one, as well as our front one. And then this whole assembly will pull right out of the truck. You just let that hang for a minute. 2mm hex driver to remove our driveshaft set screws. So right here, get that removed. That'll pull out of there and then the drive shaft will slide off of the output shaft. I'll just go ahead and rethread this set screw so I do not lose it. Same thing with our rear drive shaft. Remove the set screw. That'll pull through and then remove the drive shaft. Now we'll take our 1.5mm hex driver and go ahead and remove the spur gear cover, 3 screws. I'm not going to remove these screws all the way because it makes reassembly easier, so I'll take them out about that much. Same for this one. And our third and final screw down here at the bottom. Cover will pop right off like so. Using the 2mm hex driver, I'm going to go ahead and remove the set screw for the pinion gear. Don't have to remove this all the way, just enough. I'm going to thread lock it later, so I'll remove it enough to do that. And then the pinion gear will slide off of the shaft. Next, using the 2.5mm hex driver, we will remove the 2 screws holding the motor to the transmission assembly. Be careful with these screws, they have washers. You don't want to lose them. Like so. And this one as well. Now the transmission assembly will pull away from the motor. There we have it. I'm going to go ahead and slide the truck back now, along with our parts. Next, using the cross wrench that came with the truck, I'll use the biggest end or the 7mm side to remove the nut that retains our spur gear. Pull that off of the shaft as well as the spring, and then the spur gear will pull right off of the shaft. These are our slipper plates. We're going to reuse these. I will not be reusing the spur gear, so I'll go ahead and get rid of that. Next, we'll remove the little spacer that the spur gear rides on. Go ahead and use the 5.5mm side of the cross wrench along with the 2.5mm hex driver to remove this bottom bolt. It is through bolted. I'll take the cross wrench like so, and then the hex driver on the other side. Just go ahead and get that removed. Once the nut's removed, the bolt will pull right through. I'll go ahead and restart the nut so we don't lose anything. Same for the other 3 bolts. We have one here, and one here. These hold the motor mounting plate to the transmission assembly. So once these are removed, our mounting plate will separate from the case. Once it's loose, it'll pull right through. This one here as well. And then our fourth and final bolt. Pull that off of there. Now we can separate the motor mount from the transmission assembly. Set that there. Now we can split the case. Pull open just like that. And there we are. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and grab my new housing and we'll split that open. What we're going to do here, we're going to be replacing these gears, but I have to swap these bearings over to the new case. So these will just push right out like so. Use my finger from the back side of the case. Go ahead and press it into the new case. The small one here, there's a little cap. Just remove that cap. I'll push that through with the end of the cross wrench. Like so. Press that into the new case. Just like that. That side is complete. We can go ahead and get rid of this. I'll show you. Remove the output gear here. What keeps happening from the factory, these 3 screws that hold the output shaft to the output gear come loose. I guarantee you, and I tightened this recently. See how that one fell out? They keep coming loose. I had heard a grinding sound, and when I tore into this transmission initially, I found a bunch of plastic shavings. What it did was it stripped out about a 1/16 of an inch of plastic around that bearing there. What I suggest doing is taking that apart and applying some thread locker so those screws don't back out. Okay, so set that there for a moment. I'm going to go ahead and get this bearing popped out of this side. Good. Press that into the new case. We'll remove our idler gear, which sits on a shaft here. Set that there. And then last but not least, in terms of gears, is our drive gear. We will not be replacing this because this is already metal. We will be reusing it. So we can remove that from the case. Out with that came the bearing. We're going to go ahead and put that into the new case. So we'll go ahead and press that into the new case. Good. That completes our bearings. I'm going to grab our new metal gears. This is our output gear, which will replace that gear. And then we have our idler gear, which will replace this gear. Take our idler gear and remove it from the shaft. There's 2 bearings that sit within this idler gear that we need to swap over to our new idler gear. There's a divider within the middle of this gear, so we need to push the bearings out from the inside. So I'll take this small flathead screwdriver and I will work it out using the inner race of the bearing. Out came that one. To get this last one out, you can see within the middle of that gear, there's a plastic divider. So now we'll go ahead and push this other bearing out. I'll use the small end of the cross wrench, just push it through there. It'll hit against the inner race of the bearing, and we can push that through. You should see that bearing fall out of there, just about. There we go. Now we're done with this old idler gear. So we'll simply take these 2 bearings and press them into our new idler gear. Like so, and then we can feed our shaft through there. Just like so. That completes our idler gear. Set that here for a moment. Last but not least, in terms of gears, we have to swap our output shafts over to the new output gear. So I'll take our 1.5mm hex driver and remove these last 2 screws here. There's 1 and 2. So those are our output shafts. We are now done with this plastic gear. To do this, we simply line up the 3 holes in the output shaft with the 3 holes in the output gear. When you do this, you want to make sure that the side where your screw heads sit is facing up. I'll go ahead and line up this output shaft here, just like so. I'll set that down for a moment. Then I will take one of our screws here, and I'm going to apply the smallest amount of blue thread locker to prevent that from backing out of there. That will do. Then we'll go ahead and thread our screw in. I won't tighten it all the way just yet. Just want to get it in there. And then we'll go ahead and do the same with these other 2 screws. Once again, apply some thread locker. Thread the screw in. Okay, same thing with our last screw. We'll go ahead and thread that in. And I will go ahead and tighten this one completely. Same thing for our final 2 screws. Good, that completes our output gear. Now we'll take our drive gear. Make sure that when you feed this into the case, the drive pin faces up. If you do it the other way, then your spur gear will not seat properly. So first, I'm just going to take a small amount of all-purpose grease and just lubricate this drive gear. I'm not going crazy here, just enough to lubricate, because otherwise it'll just fling it against the side of the case. So now we can go ahead and feed the shaft through the case like so, and go ahead and seat that. So our drive gear is installed. We will do the same thing with our idler gear. Lightly grease it. Then we can go ahead and seat the gear within the case. Just like that. Perfect. And then we will go ahead and do the same thing with our output gear. And then we can go ahead and install it into the new case. Just like so. Then I'll take it and I'll just work that grease into all the teeth of the gears just by rotating it a little bit. Alrighty, now we have an all-metal gear transmission. This is our old case, we no longer need that, so I will set that off to the side. So we are all done with our gears. We can go ahead and snap together our case now. Just go ahead and put it together like so, and snap it into place. Perfect. So that is the all-metal gear upgrade within the AX10 transmission. Everything is working just as it should. Go ahead now and take our bottom bolt, feed it through like so, and I'll get our nut started on the end here. Once again, we'll take our cross wrench and our 2.5mm hex driver and get this tightened up. You don't have to go too crazy here. It is all plastic. You don't want to break anything, so just snug it up. Take our top screw now, feed it through, and then we'll take our motor mounting bracket and reinstall it just like so. You want these screw holes to line up on the top of the transmission. And then you can just go ahead and feed your screw through. It'll thread through that motor mounting bracket just like that. Same thing with our final 2 screws here. Feed them through. And go ahead and get them tightened up. Beautiful. Now we can go ahead and get our steel spur gear installed. This is a 55 tooth spur gear. Slipper pads come installed. So this will be a welcome upgrade. It'll make the truck a little bit quicker as well. Go ahead and take our spacer. Set that down within the transmission assembly. Take our slipper plate. Set that down onto the shaft first. Then we'll take the included bearing and seat that within the spur gear. We can set this right down onto the shaft. Good. We can take our second slipper plate and set that right down onto the shaft. So set our spring down onto our shaft, and we'll go ahead and get this nut restarted. And to adjust our slipper clutch, I will go ahead and fully tighten this nut until the spring is fully compressed. And then I'll back it off about 5 half turns. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That feels pretty good. So that completes our transmission upgrade. This transmission now contains all metal gears as well as the steel spur gear. Awesome. Now we can go ahead and get this reinstalled into the truck. So I'll go ahead and pull the truck back over here, and what I'll do now is take one of our motor mounting screws and my 2.5mm hex driver, and I'll just go ahead and set that screw down on the end of that hex driver. Now we'll take the transmission assembly and feed the motor through it, like so, and then I just want to get a screw started just to hold that together. So go ahead and take this and thread it into the motor, like so. Set that there for a second. Go ahead and do the same with our second screw. Go ahead and thread that into the motor as well. Leave them loose because you want to be able to still slide this to adjust your gear mesh. So keep that 2.5mm hex driver handy to retighten those screws. And we'll go ahead and grab the pinion gear. I'm going to take some blue thread locker and just apply it to that set screw. Just a little bit, hopefully. That should suffice. Then we'll take our 2mm hex driver. Then we can go ahead and set our pinion gear onto the shaft of the motor. Here is where you will play with the height of your pinion gear. So you want to make sure it lines up nicely with the spur gear. Then you could just go ahead and snug up that set screw. And I'll just snug it up because we are still playing with this. This will require a little bit of adjustment because you want a gear mesh that you're happy with. So I'm going to go ahead and slide this motor to the furthest position away from the spur gear. We'll see how I like that. Oh, we're going to go ahead and feed it in just a little bit more. That's a little bit too tight. Alright, I am pretty happy with that position now, so I'll take our 2.5mm hex driver and go ahead and tighten our motor mounting screws all the way up. So now I'm just going to go ahead and reassess the height of the pinion gear, go ahead and clean up that excess thread locker. I'm going to go ahead and just readjust this a little bit, so I'll go ahead and loosen up that set screw and just push that down just a little bit until I'm happy with how that pinion gear lines up with the teeth of the spur gear. I don't know if you guys are able to see that, but looks good. Go ahead and drive that home. Perfect. In terms of gear mesh, you want to be able to fit a piece of paper in between the teeth. So this is perfect. Now, since this is metal on metal, and also since our spur gear cover is sealed, I will go ahead and lubricate these gears using just a little bit of that all-purpose grease. Now, if you run this without your spur gear cover, then you're not going to want to use grease because that will just attract dirt and that will wear out your gears prematurely. So in that scenario, if you are running this without the cover, you'd want to use a dry lubricant. But because this is a sealed cover and because I am going to run it, I will just use some of the same all-purpose grease that we used earlier. You don't have to go too crazy here because otherwise it will just fling it against the side of the case. And then I'll just go ahead and work this grease into the teeth a little bit. Go ahead and get rid of any excess grease. Perfect. Just like that. Alrighty, so that's all greased up and we are ready to reinstall the cover. So I'll go ahead now and take our 1.5mm hex driver and take the cover. Just go ahead and snap it right on over our spur gear. This will click into place, then you can just go ahead and tighten down your 3 screws. Perfect. So now we just have to reinstall our drive shafts. So I'll just go ahead and set this here like so. Take our front drive shaft here. Go ahead and line up the hole on the drive shaft with the hole on the output shaft. And then we'll go ahead and install the set screw and just start that and go ahead and tighten that down using the 2mm hex driver. You could apply some thread locker here if you want to, but I'm not going to do that right now. Let's go ahead and make sure that's good and tight because you don't want those backing out. Take our rear drive shaft now, install it onto our output shaft, and then install our set screw. And go ahead and get that tightened down. Just verify everything is working as it should. Looks great. Then we can go ahead and take this whole assembly and reinstall it into the truck. Do make sure that you're not putting any unnecessary pressure or stress on your wires. You don't want them to bind up or get caught within the suspension components. So do be aware of that. Go ahead and take our rear driveshaft coupler and reinstall that. Just like so. And same thing for our front driveshaft coupler. Go ahead and get that reinstalled. Now I will take one of our screws here and go ahead and set that on the 2mm hex driver. Now we simply just have to line up our mounting holes with the bottom skid plate here. I'll go ahead and get our screw started. So I won't tighten that all the way yet. I'll take one of our bottom screws here in the left hand corner. Go ahead and start that one. Thread that in there. Good. Take our last top screw. Start that in there and get that threaded in. And our fourth and final screw. Make sure you maintain the position of these. These two bottom ones here are shorter and these two top ones are longer. Go ahead and get these tightened the rest of the way. Perfect. And that completes our transmission upgrade. Just go ahead and verify everything's working. Awesome. Very good. So now we have an all metal gear transmission. We have a steel spur gear, and this thing is ready to rip. Yeah, definitely a big difference. Ooh. Yep. Need that front play bar. Good combo. Oh, that was bad. Yeah. Alrighty guys, that completes our transmission upgrades on the Axial SMT10 Max D. In the next video, I will be going ahead and adding rear steering to this truck. That is something I am really looking forward to. I will also be locking the differentials, so stay tuned for all that. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please feel free to leave a like. Also, please feel free to comment. I'd love to hear from you. And please subscribe to the channel. I'd love to have you. Thank you so much for watching. I will see you in the next video.